AITA for giving my son a bill for half his expenses. My son, 17, asked me for a new gaming system, and I said no, because he already has plenty of gaming systems and games and doesn't need more. If he wants one, he can save up and buy one. He then comes to me with a budget on how we can afford the system. It was mostly just that if I buy nothing for myself for 2 months, we'll have enough for the system. I told him hell no, it's offensive, and if he wants the system he has to save up for it. Then he comes back with another budget. He and his father calculated how much I've been paid in child support over the years, and they decided it would be a good idea to let me know how little a drop in the bucket the gaming system would be. I told him I spend that on his expenses every month, but he didn't believe me. So I told him that if he doesn't think so, he can pay me for his expenses every month and I'll give him the child support. Surprise surprise, when I gave him the bill, it showed that when you factor in all of the things I pay for in a month, it's much more than child support. Child support doesn't even cover 30%. Now my ex is yelling at me for making our son feel like an expensive burden, but I think I was teaching him a lesson about money and unteaching him some of what my ex says about support. AITA for giving him a bill. AITA, not able to comment, but just wanted to say this isn't a question of being able to afford the console. I can afford it, but that doesn't mean he should just get it. NTA, if his father wants to interject, why doesn't he buy the system? That being said, I would sit down and explain that he isn't a burden, but new gaming systems are a luxury item. You can maybe help him come up with a strategy to save his own money, or suggest he take on work outside the home. He is going to be an adult soon. If his father wants to interject, why doesn't he buy the system? Because his whole point was I pay child support already. That should go to the gaming system. Why am I stuck paying for things for this kid when I already do the legal minimum? Apostrophe. Which is why the ops response was great. Fighting resentment with facts. When I met my daughter's father, my ex-husband got all mad saying he was paying too much for my son. I told him if he didn't want to pay the amount he was paying me, I was perfectly willing to take what was listed in the divorce decree. He happily agreed. Until the next month, when I asked for an extra 20%. Seems he forgot that he was supposed to pay things like half my son's medical, and I wasn't charging him for that. After seeing that, he was perfectly happy to go back to the smaller amount he was paying me. Well, at least until he had a son with his new wife. But that's a whole different story. NTA. Your ex isn't upset that you made your kid feel like an expensive burden, which you didn't, by the way. Has mad cuss he was trying to make you look bad and it backfired royally. Has been telling your son that you have been spending all that child support money on yourself. All this budgeting talk your boy came up with, that was just your ex trying to paint you as a neglectful, selfish parent. What he hoped would happen is that you would cave and buy him the gaming system so he didn't have to, while simultaneously planting little seeds of friction in your relationship with your son. And he would come out as the good guy who helped his son get what he wanted. It would have been a win-win for him. Only he didn't count on you having such a detailed budget. Now his son knows that mama is a real provider, and that, by default, makes him look like he is unable to fully support his son. And or that he weaseled his way out of paying his fair share. Your ex is basically just so budget that this'll blow up in his face. Your son is just your typical budget teenager. It'll pass. NTA. It would have been an R move to give your son a bill just to shame him. But that's not what you did. Your son was incredibly entitled and rude to you. He and your ex both implied you take the child support and spend it on yourself. You proved otherwise. And you're right. You did teach him a lesson about finances and how expensive it is to raise a child. Edit. Also, not that this isn't obvious, but a gaming system isn't a necessity. It's important you also explain to him the difference between a want and a need. Bills, food, clothing, toiletries all need to come before luxuries. Gaming systems also need extra money for games and accessories depending on the system. I always wanted one since I was like 14, but I worked my ass off to get one at 22 instead of depending on someone else's money to buy me something I want and not need. Exactly nothing made more proud than buying my own PlayStation at 18. Some kids are different though, most don't think about the way their parents could be struggling and vice versa. NTA, your son was way out of line to come to you with his child support numbers. That was dad stirring the pot. But your son's 17 and was being an ass. Go to your kid and tell him that you knew he was going to be expensive when you had him and that you love him more than money and always will. PS. Your ex is a douche who doesn't like his kid knowing how much more you've done for your son financially. The son just wants the system. You could say it's him being an ass, but I bet he just hoped it would work the first time. Maybe. But once he got the dad involved, that was to pressure her, which makes him an ass. Tell him McDonald's is hiring. NTA. You told him no, and then his father, who probably thinks he pays an exorbitant amount of child support to fund your lavish lifestyle, decided to put his 2 cents worth in, and it blew up in his face. You countered his budget with the actual household expenses. He's not mad because you made your son feel like an expensive burden. He's mad you embarrassed him and made him look a fool for all of his presumptions about your monthly household costs. NTA for this reason. And also, I think showing her son the household expenses is a good learning lesson and should be continued. I wish my parents had let me in on just what it costs to survive and how all those little purchases add up, rather than having to severely struggle my first few years out of the house because I had no idea WTF I was doing and how many bills there would be. OMG, yes. No better time to learn about expenses than seeing it in real time. Especially since here's 17. Here's income, and break that down by gross pay, taxes, and actual take home. Here's what bills cost. Here's what's left over. Here's how much eating out costs. How much clothing and fun stuff costs, etc. Your NTA at all. Your ex is pissed that his little plan to get you to purchase the system didn't work out. I'm still shaking my head that your son's idea of a new budget was for you to give up anything fun for 2 months so he could get what he wants. NTA. If your son had all that time to come up with a budget so that you could afford to get a new gaming console, I'm assuming PS5 maybe, closed bracket comma, then he can take that time and look for a part-time job to buy the console himself. You didn't give him the bill expecting him to pay it, but to give him an idea of just how expensive raising a child is. If your ex is yelling at you about your bills, then he can either chip in for the system, up the child support, or keep his nose out of your finances. My first job was when I was like 15, and I'm in my 30s now. What 17-year-old presents a budget and not a way they can earn something? Your son is also the R. See, for me it'd depend on how the budget is done. If they are saying something like, hey, we spend X on snacks per week for me, do you think we can not have those and put that money towards the console? Obviously this is more asking and not telling, but if it helps teach them to budget properly and they are making cuts to their own things to afford it, then it seems more like it's reinforcing good lessons. NTA. I love how his dad feels entitled to all of his own paychecks after the small percentage he pays in child support, and he feels your son is entitled to 100% of your income because he pitches in a small bit of his own. I asked my ex to start paying $100 a month for child support, and he claimed I just want his money for myself. Woo, well, crazy because I know people who pay $400 to $800 for one child. You should make a commercial for him. In the arms of an angel for just $3.28 a day, you can support this small human being you are supposed to be responsible for. Apostrophe. Hold the phone. Dad throws the fact that he pays child support to support his child in your face, drags your child into it in an attempt to weaponize him against you, and you're the one that's making your son feel like a burden. Your ex is a pro at embarrassing himself. NTA. NTA. Well played. He needs to learn. Sounds like his dad does too. Why on earth doesn't his dad buy it for him if he thinks it's such a good idea? Pretty sure that's what will ultimately happen here. Dad will likely undermine up and swoop in now last minute and save the day in the son's eyes by buying the console and coming off the hero. Congrats to Op for taking the right path and trying to teach some life lessons here. NTA. Your son is almost an adult, and if he views pressuring someone to going without so he can have what he wants, then he needs to learn a lesson. Your ex sucks for drafting that second budget with your son, based on child support over the years. NTA. First, he wanted proof. And second, at 17, he may need a sense of the cost of living. And third, he was believing his father's whispered suggestions that you were living large on money he could have used. There's a strong possibility he isn't upset over how his son feels, but how his son thinks about him at the moment. As long as your son knows you think he's worth it, he'll be fine. NTA. Your ex was poisoning your son's mind and you simply corrected it. NTA. Hahaha. This reminds me of some of the things my dad would say when I was in my third year of uni. He was furious when I told him I was running low on money and planned to get a part-time job to make up the difference. He said something about how he gave my mum all this money for a college fund and she must have spent it on herself. I asked my mum about it. It was only $11k, enough to pay for like one semester of tuition and living expenses, closed bracket comma, and my older sister had used most of it. He just had no idea how much our expenses were. He also never paid any child support, so I would not have blamed my mum for 1 second if she had used that money. Some dads, man. Lmao, did he think his $11k would cover a full 4 years of college and supplies / books / parking / materials for 2 kids? Plus all living expenses paid on top of that? Question mark. I was all set to say AITA because of all the times I've heard of parents on this sub trying to charge their minor children for living with them. But you didn't give him a bill. You broke down your real life expenses to teach him about the value of money. Upfront and open dialogue about the household expenses and how far a dollar will stretch will probably go a long way in dealing with this sense of entitlement he has. Educate him on wants and needs and that if he wants something he needs to work for it. NTA. NTA. This is a good conversation to have with your kid and a lot of divorced parents need to have it. I remember my mother calmly breaking down the expenses for my brother and I when one of us snapped some snotty BS about child support at her. She had to do it again when my brother turned 18 because my dad quit paying child support that very moment. My brother was snotty about his friend's parents keeping the kid's bedroom, so he had a soft place to come home to, whereas my mom had to immediately downsize, which made him feel unwelcome. She had to explain that a 3-bedroom apartment costs more than a 2-bedroom apartment. Kids don't pop out of the womb with worldly wisdom. Part of a parent's job is curing them of their idiocy. NTA. Your ex was being rude, helping your son scheme to try and guilt you into buying him something expensive, saying child support would cover it. Your son was also being rude, suggesting you not spend any of your hard-earned money on yourself and accusing you of not using child support to cover his expenses. I think this is a good lesson for your son. As a teenager myself, I understand how a lot of kids don't understand the value of money, and I think this is a good way to teach him. You never said he was a burden, you just showed him how much you spend on him, so he would understand why you didn't want to buy him something so expensive that he doesn't need out of nowhere. That was an entitled way to act, assuming he deserves it for no reason. NTA. If you were merely in the habit of ranting to your son about how expensive he is, you would be tar. But in this case, I think you rightly gave him a reality check. Even if you could easily afford to buy him a gaming system, it's an expensive recreational item that only he wants and that only he would use. He is nearly an adult and can save up to buy it himself. And for him to ask for something expensive and you to say no, and him to come back and repeatedly try to convince you to get it for him anyway, not once but twice, you were well within your rights to take the tack that you did. Not once, but twice, and went low. The first time by coming up with a way to prove mom can actually afford it by cutting out anything for her for months, and then again coming back after talking to dad with the idea that dad pays all this money per month and mom spends it all on herself when it should be his. Both are insulting as hell. This kid's 17, not 7. That's something a child would come up with. I'm a kid, so mom has to provide for me. If I want the game system, then mom should get it for me. Mom says she can't afford it? Well, if mom didn't buy Starbucks or tequila it for X months, that's enough to pay for the system right there. So she can afford it and is lying. Dad says he pays all this money every month. And there should be more than enough for the system. Mom must be taking and spending all that money on herself. That's my money. How immature for a 17-year-old. NTA. He needs to learn about money. Also, his dad is a dick. And if he wants your kid to have a new gaming system so badly, he can damn well buy it. NTA. Reassure your son of how much you love him and have never regretted the expense. And point out to his dad that, if he feels so strongly that your son deserves the console, maybe he could use some of the money he has saved by not being main carer to buy it. 18-year-old male here whose father also pays child support to his mother, although it stops in 4 weeks, when my sister turns 18 if that's relevant. NTA. Your son is practically an adult and will soon be completely responsible for himself in every sense. How he came to the conclusion that he's entitled to a $300 to $500 system is beyond me. There's nothing wrong with a 17 or even 18-year-old parents still providing for them, but an expensive console is not a necessity. NTA. Real life comes with real consequences. NTA cannot specify this enough. You are amazing, please know that. Exclamation mark. It's a great lesson for a teenager. I gotta say, not the asshole, it was a good lesson to teach, and your son wouldn't take no for an answer. My solution is, if he doesn't play on the other systems at all anymore, have him sell those and use that money as the beginning of saving for the new system. NTA. 17 years old is certainly old enough to understand household finances. He should have done a bit more research for his calculations. Your ex is definitely enough for his part. NTA. Sometimes kids and ex-partners need to know how much is actually spent on them. My son's father told him I was stealing his money and buying myself what I wanted. I showed my son what his dad sends and how much it cost to support him. It was definitely more than what he sends. Absolutely NTA. I want a new computer that'll easily cost a few thousand. I'm a 17F and I decided to get a job at minimum wage. If I can get one, he can too. Since he has time to game, he has time to work. I've worked for about a month and have $700 saved up. NTA. If your ex is so worried about it, why doesn't he just buy the system himself? LMAO. 17 is also plenty old enough to start taking financial costs of things seriously and not just be handed everything you ask for. Hell, my sister saved up for her own computer when she was around 12. Your nearly legal adult son can certainly figure out how to do the same. NTA. Although I would clarify to your son that he is not an expensive burden, he's a child. You do not mind at all paying for everything it takes to take care of him. But every new gaming system he wants is not on the list of childhood necessities. I like the wording another commenter used. Of course children are a burden, but they are a burden that parents choose to take on because they love them. NTA. Tell him he can sell his old systems to buy the new one. Even though you and your ex are legally responsible for housing him and feeding him and making sure he has necessary essentials, it's good for your son to know that eventually supporting himself will require that he pay for non-fun things, and that things like new gaming systems are luxuries that need to be planned for. Make sure he understands that you showed him this, not to imply he's a burden, but to help him have greater respect for what you do to make sure he has a comfortable life. The point is to give him a reality check, not to make him feel like he's not worth what you're spending. NTA. It's totally fair that you told him if he wants the system he has to save up. NTA. His dad sounds like 17-year-old. NTA. I think it's a good life lesson for people to know exactly how much their lifestyle costs. NTA. Your ex was a huge one and your son will be if you don't straighten him out. He is nearly a legal adult. He won't get a grasp of reality any younger. NTA. By 17 your son should be financially literate anyway, so he doesn't get hit full in the face with the reality bat in early adulthood. Your husband sounds like he's doing some agitation. Add to this the fact he's acting like a child about you, showing your son how adulthood works, and it's highly unlikely he's going to be a good role model as far as finances are concerned. So this was likely a long overdue lesson anyway. NTA. My 16-year-old just bought a Nintendo Switch and a brand new iPhone with money she saved from her summer job. My 12-year-old bought an Apple Watch and pays for his monthly PlayStation subscription thing with money he saved with his summer job. My parents own a business, which is why he is legally able to work, though he doesn't work too much because of child labor laws. Close bracket. My point is, he's definitely old enough to get a job and save to buy his own system. Also, at 17, it's probably time he start getting used to having a job and paying for things. NTA at all. Your ex definitely is though. Please click subscribe if you enjoyed this video.